Have you ever wondered how the Roman military, often outnumbered, managed to conquer vast territories and defeat mighty foes? Their secret wasn't just in their training, it was in their insane and unconventional tactics that turned the tide of battle. Remember, the Roman army wasn't always the powerhouse we think of. They often faced overwhelming odds with enemies that outnumbered them and had superior resources. From the powerful Carthaginian navy to the fierce Gallic tribes and relentless Germanic warriors, the Romans had to contend with some of the most formidable foes in history. These enemies had their own strengths, whether it was superior numbers, knowledge of the terrain, or advanced weaponry. The Romans couldn't rely on brute strength alone. They needed to outsmart and outmaneuver their adversaries. Imagine standing on the battlefield, looking at a sea of enemies, knowing you have fewer men and limited supplies. How could they possibly secure victory against such daunting challenges? So how did they do it again and again, century after century? They did it through sheer ingenuity and the willingness to employ tactics that were as audacious as they were effective. These weren't just ordinary battle strategies. They were bold moves that required precision, discipline, and a bit of madness. Let's dive into the most insane tactics that turned the Roman army into a legendary fighting force. Imagine being a Roman soldier in the heat of battle, knowing that failure could mean the death of not just you, but 1 in every 10 of your comrades. The Romans faced incredible challenges in maintaining discipline among their troops, especially after a devastating defeat. How could they ensure their soldiers would never dare to retreat or rebel? The Romans' answer was the brutal tactic of decimation. This wasn't just a spontaneous act of cruelty, but a structured policy designed to maintain strict order and discipline. What made decimation particularly Roman was its systematic application. The Romans were meticulous record keepers and organizers, and they institutionalized this severe punishment as a legal part of their military discipline. They turned an extreme measure into a structured policy, ensuring that every soldier knew the potential consequences of failure. The risk was significant. Executing 1 in 10 soldiers could potentially weaken a unit and foster resentment. Yet the Romans believed the benefits of maintaining ironclad discipline outweighed these dangers. One documented use of decimation occurred during the Crassus-led campaign against Spartacus in 71 BC. After a series of defeats and a particularly embarrassing retreat, Crassus decided to restore discipline by decimating a cohort that had shown cowardice. This brutal punishment had a profound psychological impact on the remaining soldiers. Witnessing the consequences of failure, the troops fought with renewed tenacity and loyalty in subsequent battles, significantly contributing to the eventual defeat of Spartacus. Decimation, while rare, proved to be a drastic yet very effective measure to maintain commitment in the ranks. Next, let's dive into the high seas. During the First Punic War, the Romans faced a formidable challenge: the superior Carthaginian navy. The Carthaginians had faster, more maneuverable ships and greater naval experience. How could the Romans, who were traditionally land fighters, compete on the open seas and turn the tide of battle? The Roman solution was the ingenious yet risky invention of the Corvus. This boarding device transformed naval engagements into something more familiar to the Romans: land battles. The Corvus was essentially a spiked bridge that could latch onto enemy ships, allowing Roman soldiers to storm across and engage in hand-to-hand combat. This tactic played to the Romans' strengths, leveraging their superior infantry skills even at sea. What made this tactic particularly Roman was its innovative use of engineering to overcome a strategic disadvantage. The Corvus turned naval battles into infantry confrontations, a domain where the Romans excelled. The risk was bold. It made their ships less stable and more vulnerable in rough waters, but its potential to turn naval battles into infantry confrontations was revolutionary. The effectiveness of the Corvus was spectacularly demonstrated at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC. Despite facing a more experienced navy, the Romans used the Corvus to board and capture Carthaginian ships, securing a decisive victory. By turning naval engagements into close-quarter battles, This tactic caught the Carthaginians off guard and allowed the Romans to dominate the seas. This was a game changer, turning the tide in the First Punic War and proving that Roman innovation could overcome even the most daunting challenges. 2 centuries later, during the Gallic Wars, Julius Caesar found himself in a dire situation at the fortified town of Alesia. Not only did he have to besiege a well-defended town, but he also had to contend with a massive Gallic relief force aiming to break the siege. How could Caesar ensure victory against such overwhelming odds? Caesar's response was a crazy strategy that involved the Roman engineering brilliance, the construction of double fortifications. He ordered his men to build an inner wall to contain the besieged forces and an outer wall to repel the Gallic reinforcements. This tactic was innovative in its comprehensive approach, addressing both the immediate threat and potential external attacks simultaneously. The risk was enormous. Any breach in either wall could spell disaster, but Caesar's meticulous planning and the discipline of his troops made this gamble possible, and the double fortifications at Alesia proved to be a masterstroke. Despite being outnumbered, the Romans held their ground. The inner wall effectively prevented the besieged Gauls from launching breakout attempts, trapping them within the town. Meanwhile, the outer wall repelled the massive Gallic relief force, which tried multiple times to break through and rescue their trapped comrades. After days of fierce fighting, the relief force was ultimately defeated, leading to the surrender of the besieged Gauls. The siege of Alesia remains one of the most famous examples of Roman engineering and tactical ingenuity, demonstrating how innovative and risky strategies could achieve spectacular results. But not all strategy was about direct confrontation and brute force. In the vast and diverse territories the Romans sought to control, they often faced strong alliances and united fronts that could pose threats to their expansion. How could they overcome such unified opposition and secure their dominance over various regions? The Romans mastered the art of divide and conquer, a strategy rooted in psychological warfare and astute diplomacy. They recognized that a united enemy was far more challenging to defeat than fragmented factions. To exploit this, they would foster dissent and rivalries among enemy tribes or states, turning potential allies against each other. What made this tactic particularly Roman was their systematic and calculated approach to diplomacy. They would often form temporary alliances with certain factions, offering incentives or exploiting existing tensions to sow discord. The Romans would first weaken the bonds among their enemies through strategic diplomacy, then strike decisively when their opponents were most vulnerable. However, this strategy was not without significant risks. It required in-depth knowledge of local politics and a delicate balance of force and persuasion. Misjudgments or missteps in fostering alliances could backfire, potentially uniting the enemy factions against the Romans. Moreover, the temporary alliances formed during these maneuvers could be fragile and prone to collapse if the Romans did not manage them carefully. One notable example of the divide and conquer strategy was during the Roman conquest of Britain. The Romans faced strong resistance from the Britons, who were united under powerful chieftains like Cassivellaunus during Caesar's campaigns and later leaders like Caratacus during Claudius's reign. To weaken this resistance, the Romans exploited existing rivalries among the various British tribes. By forming alliances with certain tribes and turning them against others, the Romans were able to isolate and defeat the strongest opponents individually. For instance, during Caesar's second expedition, the Romans allied with the Trinovantes, who were rivals of the Catuvalauni, led by Cassivellaunus. This alliance provided Caesar with valuable intelligence and additional forces, helping the Romans to defeat Cassivellaunus and secure a foothold, albeit temporary, in Britain. Later, under Claudius, similar strategies of exploiting tribal rivalries continued to aid the Roman conquest and consolidation of power in Britain. By dividing and conquering, the Romans effectively isolated and subdued their enemies, showing their unmatched ability to blend psychological warfare with military strategy. Despite the risks involved, this approach allowed them to expand their empire methodically and maintain control over diverse and often very hostile territories. That's it, brothers and sisters. These ingenious and often risky tactics showcase the unmatched ingenuity and effectiveness of the Roman military. They transform challenges into victories, securing the legacy of one of history's greatest empires. Dive deeper into history by watching our many other videos and share your thoughts in the comments below.